Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for Hope in Recovery. My name is Anna Rick. I'm a mental health and addictions counselor at the Health and Wellness Center. And we also have another counselor here tonight, Jessica Mock. Jess, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Jessica Mock. I'm the mental health outreach coordinator and I'm a licensed professional counselor at the Health and Wellness Center. So a few housekeeping items before we begin. So we'll be having a question and answer session after the event. So Anna's going to be asking the participants some questions. So you can post your questions in the chat as you think of them. And then I will ask our panelists these questions at the end of the program. If you have any questions or would like to speak with me privately, please just be sure to use the chat privately feature of Zoom. I will be available the entire length of the program.
And before I forget to mention too, at the end of the program, we're going to put an evaluation in the chat box. So if the students who are in attendance would be so kind to click on the evaluation and fill that out at the end, we would greatly appreciate that too. So during tonight's event, I'm going to be asking our panelists to share some of their stories about the consequences of their addictions and the triumphs in their recovery. Each of our panelists have achieved long-term recovery and some even work in the drug and alcohol field to help others with substance abuse disorders. After I ask the panel some questions, you'll be given an opportunity to ask them questions of your own. But first, I would like to allow them to introduce themselves. So Emily, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, my name's Emily. I'm from Altoona, Pennsylvania, and I'm 34 years old. Oh, I don't like saying that out loud. I just turned 34. I am in recovery from addiction. I am coming up on 10 years clean this year if I make it to May 24th. And let's see, I went to Penn State for my undergrad in psychology. I started in 2005, but I didn't finish until 2014 because of my addiction. I'll get into that part a little bit later. And then I later went and got my master's degree in counseling from Mount Aloysius and graduated in 2017. I'm a drug and alcohol therapist at the St. Joseph Institute for Addiction, which is in Port Matilda. And that's about it about me. Did you want to know anything more?
That's great. Thank you, Emily. Teddy?
Yeah, my name's Teddy. I'm 30 years old from State College, Pennsylvania. So I'm a local here. Born and raised, grew up here. Really, dove into sports throughout high school and stuff. And then I went to South Hills Business School for 2 years for the Criminal Justice Department, which I did not end up graduating. And that's part of, my story as well. But right now I currently work for my dad in the drywall construction business. I have just celebrated 4 years in beginning of February here. So still doing this recovery thing. I think that's it.
That's great. Thank you, Teddy. Reed?
My name is Reed Duchess. I am 33. I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I am what's called a certified recovery specialist at Blair Drug and Alcohol Partnership. That means that I've taken some classes and taken a test from the certification board in Pennsylvania to work directly with people who are trying to, mitigate the consequences of substance abuse in their life. I twice attempted to complete college and twice dropped out of college. Once at the University of Pittsburgh and once at Millersville University, probably for similar reasons as to the other two individuals shared. But so I'm now trying to complete school this fall, or get back into school and complete in a couple of years. So,
thank you, Reed. Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan. I am also from Altoona. So I work at Pyramid Healthcare, which is in Duncansville. It's a large drug and alcohol inpatient and detox residential, as a case manager and a CRS like Reed. So like Reed, I have that certification to use. As far as my education, I'm currently a student at Penn State World Campus in like my second year or something like that. I didn't drop out of college because I didn't start till I was 36. Did drop out of high school though, so I got that. And obtained my GED, but yep.
Thank you guys. So just so everybody knows, this event is going to be recorded, not only for the students who couldn't be here tonight, but if any of you wanted to rewatch it or learn something and wanted to show it to a friend, it will be on YouTube. So I figured we'll just get started with a couple of basic questions for our participants today. Can you guys remember how old you were when you first started, maybe not using substances, but maybe abusing substances? And can you remember the first substance that you started abusing? Emily, would you like to go first?
Sure. I was 18 and I started with cocaine. Do you want me to elaborate or just leave it at that?
You can elaborate. Was that the first thing that you ever used, or did you drink or smoke pot before?
No, I was like your typical band geek nerd in high school. Like I loved school and I loved learning. And I was just like, I fell into popularity because my parents moved when I was in 7th grade and we had a big house and it became like a party house. So I was the nerd that would host parties, but I would never use or drink at the parties. And then I mean, I might have drank. I probably drank like maybe once or twice before I was 18, probably like 16 and 17. But then I didn't start using until 18. I started using cocaine just at a party at Penn State Altoona. I was with a boy that was just a very big influence on me. And I think I wanted to be liked. So I used it with him and started liking it. And then we would just get that from time to time because we were college kids, we were broke, we didn't always have money, so we would do like an 8-ball of cocaine maybe once every month or once every 2 months, and that's like 3.5 grams of cocaine. And then it turned into opiates, because painkillers, because he decided to start doing opiate painkillers, and I was the one that was like supplying the money because I was making more money than him. My parents had wealth, so he was basically using me to get the addiction going, and then, or to supply the habit, I would say. And then I got terribly hooked on pain pills, and I still didn't think I had a problem because, you know, you always see these things on TV and you think like, well, at least I'm not using heroin. Well, then within a year I was using heroin, and I thought, well, at least I'm not shooting the heroin. And then within a few months I was shooting the heroin. And then I was like, well, at least I'm not under a bridge homeless shooting heroin. But then I kept getting arrested and I kept getting kicked out of college. That's why it took me so long to graduate, because I kept getting arrested. And every time you get arrested, Dr. Burlingame pulls you into his office and he, you know, expels you for, I don't know if he's still there, but he pushes you out his campus for a little bit. And I kept having to fight to get back and fight to get back. And then finally I got arrested with a felony because I was not only using heroin every single day, but I was selling it too, to keep up with my habit. And I wasn't like a big time drug dealer. I was like the middleman to the middleman to the middleman, but I was doing it enough to get in trouble. And in this one instance, I got caught selling drugs in a school zone, and I kind of hit the brakes then. And then I got really kicked out of Penn State. And a few years later, I was able to get back in. But yeah, so mine started with cocaine and then right to opiates and then heroin. And it's just a progression you don't see coming, and you think you're never going to do it. And then you're doing it and you're just in such denial. I mean, I never thought I had a problem and then whenever the boy that I was obsessed with moved away, he moved to Harrisburg or something, my addiction just escalated because I no longer had to take care of him and myself. I was just taking care of me. And I was probably at the end of my addiction shooting, I don't know. Eventually I went back to opiates. I was shooting probably like 2 or 3 bundles of heroin a day, which is about 30 bags. If I did that today, I would no doubtedly be dead with what's going around.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I didn't know what was coming in the heroin bags, and I was getting ripped off from time to time. So I would go back to opiate painkillers before they would start changing the chemicals in it so that you couldn't abuse them as easily. So at the end of my addiction, I was probably shooting, I would say 900 milligrams of OxyContin a day, which is disgusting to think about now, but that's where it took me.
Well, that's interesting and something to note, because there is certainly cocaine at Penn State Altoona still, and it's considered to like a party drug now. And I don't think a lot of people, not just students, but a lot of people realize that you can go from snorting cocaine to doing something much more serious. Not that cocaine is not serious,
Right.
but like pretty quickly without realizing it. Thank you for sharing that, Emily. Teddy,
Absolutely.
can you tell us what the first substance you abused was?
I was gonna say, I would say for me it was marijuana. I was gonna say it was pretty much when I turned 16, I got the freedom to drive around and sort of be on my own, and that really allowed me to do it without necessarily, my dad know what was going on. So I was able to hide it pretty well. I mean, alcohol was always there a little bit before I started smoking. It was more of just like a weekend thing. But for me, it was the first thing that I started abusing was weed, on a daily basis. So.
Okay. And you said you were what, 16?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Like I say, I dabbled in it a little bit before that, but by the time it became like an everyday thing, it was, right after I got my license pretty much. And I contribute that a lot to the friends and stuff that I was hanging out with. And
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Teddy. Reed, how about you?
I recall between 11th grade and 12th grade, somewhere in there, I believe I had my driver's license, but when I was 16, I started smoking marijuana with one of my neighbors. And then it became much more, as it does. But yeah, so that's when I started.
Thank you. Dan, how about you?
I started when I was 12, so like the end of 6th grade. I started with weed and alcohol, and I don't really differentiate a difference between like when I started abusing it to when I started using it, because it was pretty much just abusing it to begin with, because of the reasons I was using. I started off with that with a group of friends, and then it eventually turned into different things. It turned into pain pills. It turned into Oxycontin from back in that day. And as the habit gets expensiver and expensiver, you kind of migrate from one drug to the next. So pills cost a lot of money. Heroin's a heck of a lot cheaper. So I migrated into heroin. Alcohol was always kind of there, but it kind of took a little bit of backseat when it came to opiates. Towards the end of my addiction, my whole addiction, I would do whatever was in front of me. Opiates and heroin were my drug of choice, but I didn't really care what was there. I got clean from heroin or opiate drugs about 12, 13 years ago. And then I switched to, alcohol, because not a drug, it is. And continued my addiction from there, drinking, and really led me in the same place as my active drug addiction did. And I stopped that 8 years ago, I believe.
Great, congratulations. So can you guys maybe briefly explain how your addiction developed from the recreational use that you're talking about to like a more habitual abuse?
Sure. I would say that the cocaine use was recreational. When I got to opiates, that's where the withdrawal started.
Mhm.
I could go like every 2 days and I would be fine, but then I'd get very irritable. So then I started using daily and realizing I was getting terribly sick without it. I remember I would start timing myself to see how far I could get without getting terribly sick. And it got to the point where it was about 8 hours before I was shaking, having cold sweats and hot sweats, the vomiting and the diarrhea. And I think that's when the desperation just set in, is whenever I was no longer using to get high, I was using to get well throughout the day.
Yeah, absolutely. But so for you, it was going from like stimulant use to opiate use when you noticed that it was like a need and not a want anymore.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then when I switched to the needle, it was more of a want, because I formed a whole new addiction to not only the drug, but the needle.
Mhm.
I thought I was like a bad ass. I'm sorry for swearing. I thought I was cool. I thought I was cool because I was shooting myself up, and I was addicted to the process as well. And then whenever I became addicted to more and more and more, and I was realizing, I couldn't just get by with 1 or 2 pills each time I would do it. I would have to do 10 in one dose. And it was disgusting. So I was getting terribly sick without it. And that's when I realized that it wasn't fun anymore.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Emily, for sharing that.
Mhm.
Teddy, how about you?
Like I said, I really think I started abusing weed, just doing it like the everyday aspect of it. But it didn't really cause me too many consequences at first. You know, I eventually did get a possession charge, which sort of opened my parents' eyes, and you know, I ended up like having to take a year off from going to South Hills for the criminal justice program. And you know, in that time, like I had some injuries from like wrestling and stuff that, you know, sort of got me onto the painkiller aspect of things. And you know, it became a little bit more readily available. A lot of them were prescription drugs, as far as like pain pills and Adderall, and you know, the doctor prescribed ones, which is pretty much where my, you know, problems started coming. You know, it was staying up real late at night and using throughout the day, and it just became an everyday habit for me. And like a lot of the others said, you know, one thing progressed into another. You know, the pills from the doctor, it was cheaper to go ahead and get them from, you know, the guy standing on the corner in Williamsport. And you know, and then that progressed into heroin. And you know, it was definitely a slippery slope, and you know, just continuing to like see myself, and then like the consequences started adding up. But like for me, when I really was able to open my eyes is when I started having to, you know, steal or do whatever in order to support my habit. Like I wasn't able to financially support it myself, and I think that's really where I realized I had a problem.
Yeah, I think like money is definitely a big thing to realize, like, oh, I don't have any money because it's all going to this one thing, and it like doesn't even feel that good anymore. Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Teddy. Reed, how about you?
I don't think I have memories of ever recreationally using drugs, really. Like I distinctly recall the first time I used marijuana, just thinking almost immediately, like, I want to continue to feel like this, and I'm going to do, I guess, whatever. Like I decided in that moment, having never committed crime in my entire life, that I was going to be a felon and distribute marijuana because I just wanted to feel like that. And it was pretty similar with, you know, other drugs, cocaine and prescription painkillers and heroin, same kind of thing. I was always using something. You don't have to use every drug every day, but I was always using something. I don't recall ever recreationally using any drugs, you know. But marijuana was the biggest part of it from 16 until about 23, because then I got on probation, and it's real difficult to complete probation and abuse marijuana. So from about 19 until 27, that's when I used the other drugs primarily.
Thank you. Dan, how about you?
Kind of like I said earlier, I don't think there was a point where it switched from recreational to habitual. I think it was always a problem. I think I have an addict mentality even before I ever picked up a substance. And I don't think it ever switched from recreational to habitual because of the reason I was using. Like I used because it felt good, but also like when I very first started, you know, hanging out, smoking weed and drinking 40s in the woods, it was because I wanted to fit in with the people who I was with. Like I went through a lot of huge, well, not that huge, but when I was younger, I had extremely low self-esteem. I was awkward. I didn't really like who I was. And I found this group of people who kind of accepted me as this awkward person, and drugs and alcohol were part of their little subculture. And I used because it made me accepted to them. And I found that when I was drunk, and then when I was high, and then, well, when I was drunk again, I didn't feel as insecure about myself. I was able to kind of get out of my shell more, be more outspoken and things like that, which ended up biting me in the butt because people didn't like my outspokenness at the end of my addiction. But I don't think there was a point where it switched. I think it was always habitual because of why I was using. It was, you know, drugs and alcohol were a coping skill to deal with things that I didn't learn how to deal with when I was at a younger age. I didn't learn how to develop healthy coping skills. I didn't learn how to develop healthy friendships. I didn't learn how to deal with disappointment or rejection. And because drugs were how I dealt with all of that. I just numbed myself to it. So there wasn't a point where I was like, this is probably bad for me. I always knew it was bad, but it gave me something that I didn't think I could give myself.
So, I mean, Reed kind of already covered this with his story, but for you, like when you first started drinking or smoking pot, did you think, like, did you actively know that was going to be something that was going to be a part of your daily life, or did you go into it just thinking that it was going to be?
Well, funny story. The first time I ever drank, it was probably 12 or 13, and we were drinking 40s in the woods. I assume that's still a thing. And we decided we were going to walk to my buddy's house, which was like down on the other end of town. And I learned that you're not allowed to walk on an interstate. And I learned that because the cops picked us up. So I got arrested the first time I ever drank. And I probably should have known at that point, I'm probably not going to be real good at this. But I'm an idiot and I didn't. So like, yeah, I knew it was going to be a problem. I didn't care because I was more concerned with, filling that void than I was with the repercussions that came along with it.
And I imagine at 12 or 13, like it was probably almost like cool in that crowd, like to have gotten picked up by the police. Like you said, like that was kind of like this.
Yeah. I guess it was, I kind of looked at it as like, oh, I'm the bad guy, or, that I'm cool because I'm doing bad stuff.
Yeah. Thank you guys for sharing.
Yes.
So I guess beyond habitual use, like daily use, but when did you guys know that your use was then unmanageable?
I kept getting arrested. My first arrest, I think, was in like 2008. And it's because I tried to sell school books back to Penn State that I had never purchased. I stole them. I started stealing and I loved stealing. It wasn't like a fit. I started stealing because I needed to afford my habit, but then I got a thrill for it as part of the addiction. Like you just crave the chaos and you crave the adrenaline. And I started stealing and I got in trouble for it the first time, but I got away with it. I was put on an ARD program and that was taken off my record. So I kept going and my parents didn't know I had an addiction at that point. And then in like 2009, I got arrested again because I was going through withdrawal and I owed my drug dealer money and I was just terribly, terribly sick. And I was at my best friend's wedding and I decided to rob her on her wedding day and I got caught. And even that humiliation wasn't enough for me. The videographer caught me the next day. And that's what caused me to tell my parents I had an issue because I knew I was caught and I didn't know what to do. But even then, I still didn't think I had much of a problem because their solution was to put me on a Suboxone maintenance program, which can work for some people, but it's just not part of who I am. Mm-hmm. And I just started selling the Suboxone. Like as soon as I got in the clear where my parents weren't watching me take it, because my brother and sister both went through addiction too. They're twins, and to get off of what they were using, they got on a Suboxone program and it worked for them. For me, as soon as I got on it and got to the point where my parents were no longer like watching me take it, I started abusing it and selling it so that I could get what I really wanted. So then when I got arrested for the third time in 2011 for selling drugs, I probably realized right then and there, because I literally had no idea. I picked up my drugs and then I got pulled over and I thought I was getting pulled over for like crossing the yellow line in the road. Like that's how messed up I was. I had no idea that I had cops following me. And, they asked me to put my hands outside the window and they took me in the back of their car and it was my mom's 50th birthday. And I was like an hour away from having to be at her birthday party, which was a surprise. And they took me to the jail. And like, even then I tried to like hide drugs in a pocket that they couldn't find. And then the first thing they asked me was if I would be a criminal informant. And I was so scared. I was just like, I'll think about it. And I'll tell you, like sitting right there, having that question asked, I thought, I might be getting out of control. And for 6 weeks, I sat and told nobody that happened to me. They let me go. I got to my mom's party on time. I was dope sick, but I got there. And for 6 weeks, like I kept thinking I'm going to prison for 2 to 8 years, because that's what they told me. You're going to go to school, you're going to go to prison for 2 to 8 years, because when you get arrested in a school zone, it's a mandatory 2 to 4 years. And I had 2 counts of it. Apparently they had got me on a previous buy that I didn't know about. And so I would say during those 6 weeks where I was just battling this conflict of, do I work for the police? Do I tell my parents I have a problem? I think that's where I realized like my life is completely unmanageable, because at that point I had just gotten back into Penn State and I thought, well, I'm about to get kicked out again. And that, yeah, that was it for me. I just kept getting arrested and arrested and arrested.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot. And that just shows you kind of like how powerful addiction can be, like, especially like with your thought process and like
It really blows your mind. I mean, I remember in like 2009, I broke a needle off in my arm. Like the needle is lost in my arm. And I didn't care. I did nothing about it. It came out a year later. I had an abscess on my arm the size of an apple. And I still didn't think I was that bad. I thought, oh, that happens. So like, it blows my mind today to think, how was I in denial for so long? But you really are. You don't realize the people you're hurting. You don't realize the damage you're doing to your life when you're doing it, because you're just so desperate.
For sure. Thank you, Emily. Teddy, when did you realize your addiction was unmanageable?
A lot later than I probably should have. I was gonna say, like I stated previously, like I had, possession of paraphernalia charge shortly after I turned 18. I had my first and second DUI before I was 21. But what really opened my eyes and realized, like, I can't do this. Like I was already at rehab. I guess it would have been once before this, but it was when I was still at South Hills. Like I was doing my internship at Center County Correctional Facility. So like I was going into the jail, following corrections officers around, just sort of watching what their job looked like, like what you would do at an internship. And, I was up, the night before until, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and did some pills and stuff before I went in. And at lunch break, I went out and did some more, and I came back in, and, they ended up like I fell asleep, pretty much nodded out. And while I was there, and like I was eating lunch, and I was pretty much like face down in my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And, they called the cops in and, wanted to get me for like DUI if I left and everything like that. So that's like when I was just like, okay, like I didn't tell my parents for weeks that I got kicked out of school. Like, it was coming up on graduation time and they were asking me, and I finally had to tell them. But between that, like starting there to the next like 4 or 5 weeks, I also lost the job that I had at a car dealership for selling drugs on their property, and they found out about it. And so like at that point, I was just like, my life just completely fell apart. And I was just like, I can't continue to do this anymore and live a successful life. But unfortunately, like that wasn't the end of it. But that's when I realized, like, hey, like shit, things aren't working the way that they should.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Teddy. So again, like for both of you so far, there's been like a couple of moments that it like kind of started to sink in, but not fully.
Yeah.
Yeah. Reed, how about you?
In the recovery community, they say that addiction is cunning, baffling, and powerful, right? So I don't know if I ever really genuinely acknowledged that my life was unmanageable until like 10 years into it. But when I was 25, I was living in Lancaster, and I was routinely committing like home burglaries, home invasions. And I was considering robbing stores, and I was willing to hurt people. And that's like so far outside what my core values are as a person. So I don't know if I ever identified that it was unmanageable, but I certainly remember really disliking myself and really feeling like I had no idea how to stop that spiral in my life. It doesn't feel good to have to like victimize people on a daily basis just so I can go purchase something to make me feel like a normal human being, But in 2015, I was in a halfway house here in Blair County. That's how I ended up living here. And I think that's the first time I ever acknowledged that if I didn't change something in my thoughts and my behaviors, I was going to continue to get arrested, and I was going to continue to go to jail and ruin every relationship that meant anything to me. And I would never finish college, and I would never have friendships, and my family wouldn't be a part of my life, all that stuff, you know? So I guess it unfortunately took substantially longer than it took everyone else in my life to see it. But when I came to the halfway house and was so sick of probation and going to jail and going to treatment and that stuff, I think that was the first time I was ever willing to be like moderately honest with myself and say like, okay, you have to at least try something different. Even if you only do it for a year and everyone thinks that like you're totally fixed or cured or whatever people think about addicts, I had to do something different, you know? So yeah, it's a strange thing. Addiction doesn't let you act rationally. It doesn't let you think very rationally. So even identifying anything you're doing is unmanageable is like not part of the process. If it was, we probably wouldn't, you know, be such degenerates, right? But I guess that's the closest I can come to saying I realized it was unmanageable. It was definitely the home invasion stuff. That's the worst I've ever felt about myself in my whole life.
Okay, so it sounds like again, like moments where you didn't like yourself, but never really like an aha moment of unmanageability.
Well, no, because you keep telling yourself, I just haven't figured out the right way to do it.
Yeah.
You know, because there's a right way to use drugs, just Reed can't figure it out. There probably isn't, right? But like, that's what I kept telling myself.
Right. And like,
So
you just have to keep trying.
If I had enough money, or if people would, you know, if I wasn't on probation, if people would leave me alone, if drugs were legal, I would tell myself all the foolishness to, you know, propagate the behavior.
Yeah. Thanks, Reed. Dan, how about you?
I love that in this group, we can laugh about a home invasion and that being maybe a problem. I like Reed. I don't think there was ever a time when like, I don't think I ever knew that it wasn't unmanageable in my like first part of my active addiction. Because I kind of divide my use up into two sections of my life. There was a heavy drug use part, and then there was a heavy alcohol and not drug use part. Which people will say, you know, alcohol is a drug and everything's a drug. But to me, I have to divide those things into two separate things because it's very easy for me to forget that one is not the other. When I was using drugs, I think I always knew that it was unmanageable. But I was really good at managing unmanageable. And I think a lot of me just resigned myself to this is my life. This is what's going to be. Because I mean, there's always a portion of like your active addiction where you don't really care if you wake up the next day, or you don't really care if you're alive anymore. So you're just kind of, it is what it is for today, and we'll see what happens tomorrow. For me, at least. I went to jail. I don't remember what year, but 6 months in lovely Blair County Prison was enough for me to not do drugs again. Probably not because jail was horrible. It was just because I had 6 months of not doing drugs. And it seemed like kind of a pain in the ass to go back to doing it at that point. But what I did do when I got released was I immediately started drinking because I was like, I don't have a problem with alcohol. It's not heroin. Because addicts are stupid people sometimes in our rationale. So there was a clear moment when I knew that like my drinking was unmanageable. And I was at my mom's house where my brother and sister live with her. They're like 10 and 12 years younger than me. And I was down in my little brother's bedroom. I don't remember how old he was at that time. He was probably in like junior high, maybe. And he had this coffee cup on top of his dresser, and there was money in it. And I was looking at the money, and I didn't have enough money to go to the bar that night. So I stole money out of his cup so I could go to the bar. And I remember thinking to myself, like, as I was looking at it and doing it, I was like, this is the exact same thing you did for heroin or you did for drugs back in the past. And then I took the money and I went to the bar because you don't allow yourself, you allow yourself to see those moments, but your addiction quickly clouds it up and be like, oh, you'll pay it back. You'll pay it back. The second moment was I was working in a drug and alcohol rehab, and I worked a double on Saturdays and I had to come in on Sundays. And every morning when I came in, I was hungover because I was at the bar till closing and then drinking way after. And I had clients telling me, hey, you should probably eat some toothpaste because you smell horrible. And I also remember a pivotal moment being like, we were sitting in a step study and we were reading out of the 12 and 12. And like, I had prior knowledge of that because I had been to rehab, I had been to meetings. So like, I knew about the steps and I knew about that stuff, but we were sitting there in this group and they were reading about it. And like, everything suddenly, like the words on the pages made sense to me and like kind of hit home because for a long time, I was really good at arguing away the sense that like the AA literature made. And one day it made sense. And another pivotal moment, which is probably the force between every man's decision, was there was a woman behind it who said, if you don't stop this, I'm going to leave, or you're going to leave, because she owned the house. And I didn't want to be homeless again. So I decided maybe I should stop drinking. The end.
Okay. I'm hearing some like external things like the threat of homelessness, but then like a lot of internal things too, like realizations.
Yeah. The guilt was a huge realization. And like homelessness wasn't an issue like when I was using drugs because I was homeless quite a few times and for quite a bit of time. But I didn't feel like doing that anymore, apparently.
Yeah. So as you guys have kind of said already, there's like this gap between realizing like, I don't want to live like this anymore, or I can't keep living like this, and then actually doing something about it. So can you guys tell me, like, at what point did you decide to make changes, and what steps did you make in order to make those changes in your life?
For me, I didn't know it was coming. When I got arrested for my last time and I eventually told on myself to my parents, they decided they were going to detox me because I was so terribly addicted, and they were going to put me on Suboxone. I went through they put me on Suboxone too soon. So I went into a horrific precipitated withdrawal. And I mean, I felt like my legs were amputated. It was the worst feeling of my life. My mom left home because she was my greatest enabler. And my dad knew that if she stayed home with me, I would somehow manipulate her out of the money, or manipulate money out of her. And so for 2 weeks, I didn't eat, I didn't sleep. I was just awful. My dad would give me Suboxone in my mouth and like sit there while it dissolved in my mouth. And I thought I was out of the clear. After 2 weeks, I finally started feeling better, and he actually let me out of the house one day to go to like the arts festival or something. And I liked how I was feeling. Like I had finally gotten regulated on Suboxone. I thought, okay, well, this will be my life. And then I finished outpatient counseling for the wedding theft that I was mandated to do. And I came home that day, and I had been trying to get out of it. I texted my dad. I was like, I don't feel good. I'm not going to go today. He's like, yes, you are going to go. I said, no, I'm not. I don't feel good. And really, I was just being lazy and not wanting to go. He's like, you're getting your certificate of completion today for the lawyer. You're going to go. So he picked me up and he took me, because at this point he took my car away, and he brought me home, and I walked into a full-blown intervention with my family in my living room. Now I had not taken my Suboxone that day, so I was nasty. I was mean. They had my whole family there, which threw me off because I'm like, why aren't they at work? And my mom was there, and I'm like, oh, thank God my mom's here. As soon as my mom got home, I went from having that mentality of like, okay, I can do this on Suboxone to like, okay, my mom's home, I can go back to heroin. And they had her one friend who had been in recovery, and then they had my best friend, Christy. Now, I grew up with her, and she was like such a wholesome girl, that the fact that I knew that she knew I was putting a needle in my arm blew my mind. And so they went around a circle, and they all read a letter to me that said, you know, this was the M that we knew. This is the M you've become. We want you to please get help. Choose St. Joseph's. And I was like, what is St. Joseph's? And they all went around the circle and I had nothing to me. I had no emotion. They were sitting there sobbing. I was just raw and pissed off. And then my friend Christy shared her letter and it hit me. She was the ringer. And I felt like a little bit of an emotion thinking like, oh my God, maybe I do need help. And I said, like, I'll think about it or something like that. And I went, and then they gave me my Suboxone for the day finally. And I thought that was going to be it. And I went upstairs and took a shower. And I was thinking about it, but I was also trying to think of how to get out of it. And by the time I got out of the shower, they had my entire bedroom packed. They said, okay, let's go. And I said, I'll look at it. I'm not staying. I'd never been away from home. I'm such a mama's girl. Like, I did not want to leave the house. I was like, okay, I'll go check it out. They didn't tell me it was like close to home. It was like a half hour away. They drove like in and out of neighborhoods around so that I wouldn't figure out how to leave if I wanted to leave. And then I met the owner and they're telling me about this facility. And meanwhile, I had like snuck a Suboxone like in my bra or something. And that's the only thing I could think of, like, oh my God, are they going to like strip search me? And they said, well, how about you just come look at the bedrooms? And when I went to look at the bedrooms, my family left me there. They up and just bolted. I was livid. I mean, my dad is Jewish and he sent me to a Christian treatment center. So I was like, you sent me to effing church camp. I wasn't allowed to have my phone. They didn't have a TV in the bedroom. I was like such a spoiled freaking brat. I was throwing things at the techs would come to like get me for programming and I was like whipping things at their head. I was refusing to go to programming. I called my dad. I said, you sent me to effing church camp. Come pick me up now. And he wouldn't. And I'm sobbing and I'm trying everything possible. And he hung up on me and no one would answer the phone for 3 days. And I went through withdrawal from the Suboxone. And then I started like going to programming thinking like, okay, I'll just do this and then I'll go home and then I won't be addicted and I can just use for fun. And then after like 2 weeks, something happened where I liked waking up without having that desperation. I liked like not having to think about, okay, where am I going to get money? Who's going to have drugs that day? It was such a relief. So I started liking it. And then I was getting involved in like the 12-step program. I was becoming like a little Jewish Christian and it was just like perfect for me. I felt like I fit in. I was making new friends. And then I was like, all right, I'll give this a try. And I kind of just did everything that they told me. But I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Or is that right now? That's later, right?
Sure.
Okay.
So, I mean, just to kind of summarize, Emily, it sounds like even when you did make these decisions to change, it wasn't really your choice, but then at some point you took ownership of those changes and that probably was even more meaningful for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But it wasn't until I lost everything and was stuck in the woods.
Where you now work.
Yeah, where I now work. Full circle.
Thanks, Emily. Teddy, how about you? What changes did you make?
So for me, like I really, once I was explaining earlier, like that point in my life where I lost my job, I got kicked out of school. I realized I had a problem, but so I started like going to meetings. I got introduced to the meetings. I went to a rehab. At that point I was able to maintain a little bit of clean time for myself, but I didn't really change the people that I was hanging out with. I wasn't really able to get much traction. I was constantly in and out of the rooms. I would go to meetings high or intoxicated, so on and so forth. I would say for me, the changing moment was going to jail. That's when my clean time this time started. I got, my third, fourth, and fifth DUI in the matter of 2.5 months of each other. And, I really suffered some legal consequences for that. And I got sentenced to a state sentence. So I had to go to Camp Hill here in Pennsylvania and go get classified and all of that. So I guess in a sense, like that really distanced me from the people that I was hanging out with at the time. Like the people that I would hear from were people like Emily Lee, who I knew from the meetings and stuff in State College, and my parents. So my circle got a lot smaller at that point, but that's when I realized like, hey, this is not what I want my life to look like. You know, it gave me a little bit of time in between my last use, but that didn't necessarily mean to me that I was going to stay clean whenever I got out. But I made the decision in there, like I willingly, like while I was in Center County, I put myself into the drug and alcohol program in there. So I just wasn't sitting on the block. Like I was trying to use my time wisely. Like I got a job in there. I wanted to stay active, sort of like, you know, do what I could. Like I was out on the street, because a lot of my using, like a lot of my triggers and stuff were, you know, like going to work, like as if I need an excuse to use, but like these are the things that I would tell myself a lot of the times. You know, it's like, oh, I can't work at it. And I work a lot better whenever I'm high. So, you know, and I eventually went to the boot camp, which is up in Carthage, Pennsylvania. I learned a lot of stuff there, but that just helped, you know, me find like a purpose and, you know, swallow some humility, or get some humility and swallow my pride a little bit. And then the big thing for me whenever I got out was plugging into the NA and AA program. You know, surrounding myself with positive people who are doing something different than the typical people that I was hanging out with. And, you know, I was ordered to do outpatient counseling, which was, you know, pretty intensive at first. It was 3 times a week. You know, and I got a lot out of it. Like there was a lot of stuff that I needed to work on internally, you know, throughout all the years, and, you know, things that I didn't, you know, I think Dan was saying, like, I didn't deal with things, like I didn't deal with my emotions the right way. Like I just used and drank in order to get rid of them and not really feel anything. But you know, a lot of it, like, you know, today is just like the fellowship aspect of the recovery community that I'm in, and you know, just continuing to work on myself, and, you know, the good things come eventually. So, you know, I still have a lot, you know, over my head. Like I still have, you know, I think I'm down to like 13 years of parole now, but you know, things are getting better, you know, and things just continue to add up. So
That's great. Nice, and congratulations on 4 years too.
thank you.
Reed, how about you? What did you do to make a change?
I mean, kind of against my will, went to treatment and stuff, because I just stopped showing up for probation because I knew I would fail urine tests. And I went to the treatment. At this point, it was the 2nd time for inpatient, and the 4th time I'd been to detoxification. And it would have been like the 15th time I went to jail, and I didn't want to go to jail, and I didn't want to go to treatment, but I didn't go to probation. So I sent myself to treatment thinking that he would say, as my probation officers normally did, hey, if you finish, like, you can go, and then I can start, you know, the whole thing all over again. But this time he had the intuition to tell the counselor there that if I didn't do everything that the you know, provider recommended, that he would just maximize my time on probation, which at that point is about 2 years. And I didn't want to spend 2 more years of my life incarcerated. So I went to inpatient, and then I came here to Blair County for a halfway house. At some point during the halfway house, I decided I wasn't going to use drugs till I got done with probation. That was like my goal. I said, okay, my biggest problem is I go to jail because I fail urine tests. So if I get off probation, I'll be cool. And that was a little more than a year after I got out of the halfway house that I was done with probation. And in that time, I got involved in 12-step, and I had a sponsor, and I stopped hanging out with people who I knew were criminals. And I was a reliable person for my employer, and I told the truth, and I cared about things, you know. And when I finally got to the point that I finished probation, it was so surreal to like myself, because way before I started using drugs, I was just like a horrendously insecure person, and it kind of dictated a lot of my choices in my life. And I think that's why drugs became so desirable, to, you know, mitigate insecurity. But so yeah, I mean, I did all the stuff they tell you to do. I went to treatment, I went to meetings, and I went to outpatient, you know, therapy, and intensive outpatient and individual therapy. And I, you know, connected with people who weren't gonna just let me use drugs and be an idiot. So somewhere along that way, like I said, I found out for the first time in my life, like what it felt like to really like myself, to wake up and say, like, I want to be the person that I woke up being today. I don't want to be someone else, and I don't want to, live a different life necessarily. So yeah, and then since then, I've just started working in the field for drug and alcohol stuff, and I just really changed my own habits. And this is going to sound ridiculous, but like probably the most important thing I do today is I think before I act, which sounds so juvenile. And how did it take me until I was 30 years old or whatever to figure that out? But that is the most powerful tool I have today. I just consider like the realistic consequences for, hey, if you do this, what's going to happen? And I now have enough experience and insight to gauge pretty well what's going to happen, depending on the choice I make. And then there's some other things, like I work through the 12 steps related to Buddhism. That's how my sponsor chose to do it with me, because that's what I was open to. So you just pick up some patterns of thinking that are different. And that just became really beneficial, kind of like changed my life, because it allowed me to not allow insecurity, which created narcissism and arrogance and laziness and all these things that were like severe character defects that I have and still have, really. But so, since I've been done with counseling and all that stuff, that I've just continued doing what allows me to be a healthy person and like myself.
Thanks, Reed. Dan, how about you?
What was the question? What made us want to change? And what's
Yeah.
that?
Like what changed? Like how did you make a change? Was it rehab? Was it meetings? What was it?
I went to rehab probably midway through my active addiction. I went because family members wanted me to. I wasn't going because I wanted to. And I sat there, I listened, and I left and I got high immediately because I wasn't ready to make the change. Jail is really the big thing that helped me get clean. But after that, going to meetings, I started going to AA. I got a sponsor. I started listening. Basically, I just did what people told me instead of doing what I wanted, because I do everything completely wrong, generally. Like Reed said, like thinking of what the consequences are to your actions, or like how, like what you do matters either in a negative or a positive way. And a lot of working through the steps was realizing that people would accept me how I was, and I didn't have to be a certain way, because I was a pretty messed up person when I first got into the rooms. And working through the steps, identifying what my insecurities were and being confident enough to be able to talk about those insecurities and like being able to work on them. Because, part of the steps is recognizing what your insecurities are, and then you actually, have to do something to fix those things. But that's what made the biggest impact on my recovery, I think, was learning to work on myself and learning to love myself through my faults and my what I do good and what I do bad. Because I learn more from what I do, what I fail at, than what I do when I do it the right way, if that makes sense. And also just learning to, at first, it's learning to second guess what I'm thinking. Because there was a comedian who came through here who was in recovery a couple years ago, and their biggest slogan was "First thought wrong." And my first thought is generally wrong. It still is sometimes. I'm still, I'm an addict in recovery. I didn't recover from addiction. Like, I still am an addict, and I still think like an addict. I just know better not to act upon it now. And I know how to work through those thoughts and those feelings. Mental health, I also got on meds, which was good, like mental health medication. So like a mood stabilizer. I didn't realize how angry I was and how unstabilized my moods were. And I was always one of those people who never wanted to be on medications, because I thought that's another weakness, because I have to take this pill to be able to seem normal. Even though I was doing that myself with self-medicating. It's worse when a doctor tells you to do it. I know what I'm doing. But I started taking meds, and one of the biggest things that like hit me was like I screwed up a lot of things in my brain, like using from 12 to however old, like into my mid late 20s. You don't think about like what goes on chemically and neurologically in your brain and how drugs and alcohol and just addictive thinking in general like messes up how your brain works. And for some people, it takes something else to be able to get that balanced back out. And I'm a much happier person with my moods on one level instead of, pissed off here and happy go lucky here. It's a miserable way to live your life. And that stabilization also helped me be able to, be a little more introspective and see what was going on with me. Dan again.
Thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate your experience with mental health medication, which I think is a really important part of recovery from any number of different concerns, whether that's mental health concerns or addiction or eating disorders or whatever. Sometimes that's what you need at that time. So thank you for bringing that up. So we don't have a whole lot of time left, if any, but if really, really quickly, you could just each of you tell me, like, I want to like put the hope in this program, right? The hope in recovery. Tell me like how, very briefly, how you would compare your life in active addiction to the life that you have now.
I would say it's not comparable. I got everything back. I have joy today, and I actually love myself today. I don't love myself every day, but I love myself a lot more than I ever could before. And I wouldn't trade it. I would go through it all again to be the person I am today.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. Teddy, how about you?
I would say I'd put it in these terms. I was a person that no one wanted around in my family. And then 2 weeks ago, my little brother had a wrestling, a senior night for wrestling. And they asked him who his role model, and he said me. And like, it really brought like tears to my eyes. Because I know when I was growing up, it was always my dad or a famous sports player. And then for my brother to say that, I think that sort of sums up recovery for me.
Absolutely. That's huge. That's awesome. Reed, how about you? How would you compare?
Compared it to several years ago, it's just unrecognizable, in a very, very positive way. Like I said, I wake up and I want to be me today. And before I used drugs, I didn't wake up and want to be me. So that's very new and that's very fulfilling. But people trust me and I trust me, and I have relationships with my family and friends, and I have good reputation, which is still crazy to me, that's part of my life today. But it is just so far in the opposite direction of how it was years ago, that if someone would have told me years before that it could have gotten this good, I probably wouldn't have. But I may have actually considered making some changes earlier, because it's just so much better than I believed it could be.
Thank you. Dan, how about you? How would you compare?
Night and day. In my active addiction, all I cared about was me, and I wanted to take from everybody, and I didn't care what you thought about it or how it made you feel. Whereas now I want to give back, so to say. I want to be a positive person in life. I want to leave behind something that like people remember me by as positively, and not just that junkie. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. That sounds good.
Thanks, Dan. So now that we have like 2 questions from students, and it doesn't matter who answers this, and I imagine it varies, but how much did heroin cost to use per day or per week, or however you want to say it? How much did that cost you?
All the money I could possibly find in that moment.
Same.
Mm-hmm. I'm too old to even remember what I used to pay for it.
Is it like hundreds of dollars, tens of dollars?
I'm sure it's more expensive now. I think for 10 bags, I think it was like $160 for back in my day.
Yeah, so I can't
Knew the
imagine
right
it's
people it
cheaper
was.
now.
Would you
What,
say?
Dan? I'm sorry.
I said if you knew the right people, it was.
Yeah. Yeah, some people might make you pay $300. I can't remember. It's been a while. That's probably a good thing I can't remember.
So bottom line, expensive, no matter if. it's-
Yeah, way too expensive. Thousands of dollars a day. If you go to income tax, that was gone the next day.
Yeah, you could have $1 million and it still wouldn't be enough.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Time to spend that in a day.
Yeah, and I think you even see that with like, celebrities who have access to all the money and all the drugs in the world, like, still spend quite a bit of money on substances. But yeah, there's like never enough money, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the next question is, what was the hardest sobriety milestone for you?
Oh God. Feeling your emotions again. You're so numb for so long. The first feeling you get, it's like, oh my God, I'm gonna die.
And like,
And death is hard, and heartbreak, and getting injured for me was huge, because I had such a reservation that I was gonna like get it to be on opiates, and it would be a freebie because I'd be prescribed. And then it came down to like, I don't want them. So
Mhm.
that was hard for me. But what about you, Ted?
I guess I think I interpreted the question a little bit different. It was just like milestone. And for me, I think like anything over 5 days, like that physical, the withdrawal period, if I could get anything over that, like I was feeling good with myself. It was just, it took me so long and so many years to get past that point where, eventually it took jail for me to get past that milestone.
yeah, so it sounds like the physical withdrawal part probably was a difficult barrier for you to break initially.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Reader Dan, what about you guys?
I had pretty fortunate since 2015 till now. I became extraordinarily willing. I mean, for me to do what people suggested I do. So everything has been pretty good compared to the life, 5 years before that. The hardest thing since I've been in recovery, I had stolen my neighbor, and my neighbor had been my neighbor my entire life, and I was best friends with his son, and he treated me with respect and as if like I was one of his own kids, and I had an awesome relationship with him my whole life. But he coached high school basketball, and they had won the state champions one year, and they gave him this ring that was like just some huge piece of gold, right? And I broke in his house and I took it, and it was just like a really awful thing to do to begin with. But when I was in the halfway house, my dad called me one day and said, hey, our neighbor, he's asking, did you take that? Like, was that you? Because he wants to know where it went. So I remember telling my dad that I would come home as soon as I could and like admit it to his face. And I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, burglary is a felony. I'm still on probation. But that was the first time in my life that I was willing to do what I believed in as like an ethical and moral person, despite the consequences, because I was ready for him to press charges and go to the police and say like, excuse me, like thank me for being honest, but being like, hey man, like that was a $5,000 ring that was extraordinarily sentimental that you stole to buy $400 of narcotics, right? So like you deserve to be in prison. Fortunately, he didn't do that, but that was one of the hardest moments in my entire life, just having to like be honest with my neighbors that like you only ever treated me with respect and love, and like this is how I chose to repay you. But I mean, other than that, like I said, I've been really fortunate just because I've been super willing to act differently and take suggestions and advice from people and let people who care about me in my life and care about people who are good people, that kind of thing. So.
Absolutely. So it's like, when you're working, and for those of our students who don't know, AA is Alcoholics Anonymous, NA is Narcotics Anonymous. And so like you learn all of these things as you're working these programs or like working with your sponsor or whatever. And kind of for you, it sounds like when you had to like, when the rubber met the road or whatever, like when you actually had to put it in practice in a big way.
I had to prove myself like, hey, your life's never going to change if you don't actually start acting like the person who you tell people you are.
Yeah, that would have been super hard and scary. Thanks, Reed. Dan, did you want to say anything?
Sure. All of it. No, first year was probably the hardest because it took me about a year to get out of my own way and to start being willing. And the other hardest part was probably making amends to my brother and sister. Because, part of making amends is going up to them in person and being like, hey, sorry I was such a crappy older brother for all those years of your life. And one of the best things was them saying, it's okay, or forgiving me. They didn't actually say it was okay, but
Yeah. So like, it sounds like for both of you, Reed and Dan, like that act of vulnerability was really rewarding to you, but very difficult for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, because, I always had that fear of being vulnerable and someone exploiting it. That was a driving force of why I started using. So for, to see it have an actual different outcome was terrifying and, the best thing that could ever happen at the same time.
Well, unless anybody else has any questions, since we're already kind of over time, I'll end the program. But if any of you do have any questions about any of the information that we shared today, or have questions for me or Jess, like I said, we're counselors. She put her information in the chat box. So you can reach out to us through her email or through calling the Health and Wellness Center on campus. Jess also put the evaluation. So if you guys have a minute, please fill that out for us too. And I just wanted to say thank you to the 4 of you for participating today. And I really appreciate you being here and being so open about all of the difficulties in your life and sharing what recovery means to you. I think that it's really a valuable story to tell.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, guys. Oh, and just so you know, guys, for students who need more things for first year seminar, we're also having an event next week for Friends for Life. So look on Connect for that too. Thank you all for coming.